please join me in welcoming Aaron Smith.
Hi everyone, thank you Christina for the introduction. Can everyone hear me? I'm not used to using this microphone. Okay, great. So as Christina mentioned, my interests are in modern historic architecture. So when this building came up as an option for my project, I pounced immediately because I was immediately attracted to this building. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share with you guys the findings from my research. Is there someone who could change these slides? I just realized.
Can you, Steve, can you
Great, thank you. Before I start, I just want to give a special thank you to your church clerk, Karen, who graciously helped in looking through archival material and your congregation's history with me. And also Christina for lending me a fascinating book on Christian Science architecture. It was actually authored by the architect of your building. It was a great source of information. And then also to you guys, the congregation, for sharing your building's history with me and not being too weirded out if you saw me around taking pictures of doorknobs or floor tiles and other weird building elements. So this is just an overview of what I'm going to be sharing with you all today. I'll give you a little background on why I undertook this project and what it involved. A brief architectural description of the building in case any of you are unfamiliar with modern architecture. Background on the building's history and its significance in the world of Christian Science architecture, and then information on the architect of the building and how it kind of fits into modern architecture and Christian Science. So the project was a semester-long project for a course on historic documentation. And that involved learning how to conduct historical research on properties, learn how to write an accurate description of a building, evaluating properties against our national criteria for how you determine if a building is historically significant, and then also preparing visual documentation of historic properties, so looking through floor plans and learning how to accurately photograph a building. So an architectural description has many parts, and these are just some of the parts of what make up that description. And the goal of it is to accurately describe what is there at the time, so that generations to come, if the building isn't there anymore, if it's changed, people will have an accurate idea of what was there. So this is a picture on the top of the church just after it was completed in 1952. And then this is a picture that I took in September of 2016 of the building. So as you can see, it is a modern in style. And this is exemplified through having a symmetrical plan with the two wings, a flat roof, the central prominent tower, that's definitely the most notable feature of the building. Very plain facades, unadorned. They don't have a lot of detail on them. And then also, it was designed with a stark concrete slab plaza in the front with minimal landscaping. So as you can see, the building hasn't changed too much over time on the exterior, and interestingly enough, on the interior as well. It's retained a very high level of integrity. So the first step in my research was to go to the Austin History Center and look at a fire insurance plan. And that was a plan that was all hand-drawn back in the day. This is from 1961, and they showed what was on the different lots in the downtown. So this is from 1961, after the building had been constructed. And it actually lends a lot of information to the history of the building. The blue color told me that it was made out of concrete block. So the bricks that you see on the outside and the Virginia greenstone marble that covers the tower, those are veneers. They're put on top of the concrete block. It was built with steel truss roof system and air conditioning in it. And you can see that they've even labeled when it was built, 1951, on there. And then kind of labeled that the one wing is for educational Sunday school purposes, and the other is for the auditorium. So the First Church of Christ Scientist Austin congregation, it actually has the distinction of being the first Christian Science congregation in the state of Texas, which is pretty cool. You guys date back to 1889, which was shortly after the religion was founded in Massachusetts. And services have been held in various locations since then. They didn't have a purpose-built church building until 1923, when this building was constructed, just a couple blocks over at Colorado Street and 14th Street. It was constructed in the more traditional style of architecture for Christian Science buildings and by an unknown architect. The building was dedicated in 1931, which I learned that Christian Science churches are dedicated once they're debt-free. So the dedication date may not necessarily be the date of its actual construction.
Right.
So this is these are more fire insurance plans of this property, dating back to 1889. And you can see that after that church was built in the 30s, the congregation was growing and they decided that they needed a new space. And so in 1939, the church voted and they purchased the lots on this corner. And then in 1961, you can see the building had been built. Originally, there were 2 wooden frame cottages on the property. And as you can see, this is pre-construction, a picture of the lot and what was there before. And then this is a rendering, drawing by the architect of what they wanted the building to look like. Particularly the church was wanting to have a separate section for the Sunday school that they didn't have previously, and that's a very common thing in Christian Science architecture, to have the Sunday school separate from the auditorium. Originally, the building committee that was created by the church to kind of manage all of the tasks creating the new building, they wanted to hire a local architect, but then when they started kind of looking at their options, they wanted an architect who would speak the language of Christian Scientists and who would understand what the congregation's needs were and wants would be when creating a new building. So they ended up going with the man who drew this, Charles D. Faulkner, because at the time he had been known for his extensive experience in Christian Science architecture. So this is a picture of the building under construction in 1951. After funds were secured, they sold the original building that was on Colorado Street to the Central Methodist Church to help with funding. The ground was broken on August 6, 1951. It was built by a prominent builder, J.M. Odom. Jamie Odom started his construction company in 1929 in Austin, and by the 50s, he was a prominent name in the construction industry. When I was doing research on other buildings that were being built at the time, trying to get an idea of what other things he had done, his name was on so many different bids for buildings across the city. And it seemed like he always put in one of the lowest bids, so he often got the projects. So he was very prominent in the city. And this is a picture of it under construction before they put on the marble slabs that are on the tower today. So the building was completed in 1952, and this is what it looked like right after completion. You can even see the Capitol building still in the background, which I think is really neat. And then this is it in its current condition today. So there haven't been too many changes, other than a few kind of minor, like reversible things that have been done on the interior, and then the addition of kind of railings for safety and security, and some more signage included. But the windows appear to be original. The stone on the tower is original, and I think most notably the biggest change would be in the landscaping. Part of that is because trees have grown in the last 50 years, but also the original pink mimosa trees that were put in the front retaining walls, those were taken out in the 80s and they were replaced with a larger tree species that ended up kind of overgrowing. And then these 3 singular trees were put in those landscaping strips. So it's kind of lost that stark modernist look to it, but overall the integrity is very high. So the National Register criteria are a standard set of criteria that's used across America for figuring out why a building is historically significant. So those are the criteria that I used when looking at this building. So typically, a building might be associated with a significant event or a significant person. It could be representative of a certain type or a period or a way of constructing. It could be the work of a master architect or designer. Could just have high artistic value. And then also reserved for archaeological sites. It could yield information about prehistory. So for this building, the significance lies in the fact that it's the work of a master, and that it has distinctive characteristics of a certain type, period, and method of construction in Austin. This is a picture of the building after Sunday services in 1953, which I think is really cool because you can see all the old cars and people gathering out front. And you can even see that the Sunday school doors actually used to look like the wooden carved doors that are on the interior. Those were changed shortly after the building opened because they were exposed to the elements and they were near a lot of vegetation in that area. So I think they rotted out, so they ended up changing them for this kind of aluminum style that we have now. And then actually on the right side of the Sunday school doors, Christina and I found a cornerstone for the building that has carved in it 1951, the date that it was created, but it's kind of covered by bushes now. But if you're on your way out and you want to see what the cornerstone looks like, it's there. So its significance as the work of a master, it lies in the fact that it was designed by the leading Christian Science church architect Charles D. Faulkner. He designed more Christian Science churches than any other architect that's known. Over 33 to be exact, and I've found 27 of them. So there's still a couple that are out there. I don't know if they're still existing, they might have been demolished, but he designed a lot of them. And he also authored this book called Christian Science Church Edifices that he published in 1946. This book prescribed standards for how new church buildings should be built for Christian Science churches. So he looked at how you would pick a site location, how you would orient the building, how the interior should be laid out, how the building committee and fund should be set up, and what role the architect should play in that. And he even prescribed standards for the height and the specifications for the brass lettering that you see on the interiors of the building. So he went down to some fine details. This is a picture of the foyer area shortly after construction, and you can see some of the original furniture is even still out there. The doors may have changed a little bit to accommodate some glass panels in the top, but largely remains very much intact. And the building also, it has the massing and the proportions and the ornamentation that's very distinctly representative of his work during the mid-20th century when this building was built. So just for some background, in the early 1900s, shortly after the religion was founded, churches were being built all across the U.S. For the Christian Science congregations. And they were mostly built in this classical American colonial kind of style of architecture. One of the prominent architects of the time was Solon S. Beeman. And he kind of championed this classical colonial style of architecture that you'd see here from earlier churches. I think part of that was, in fact, that he wanted to have a distinctly American style of architecture for a religion that was founded in America. And so Charles D. Faulkner was actually working with Solon after he graduated in Chicago, and then he decided to branch off and start his own firm in 1919. He still continued to use the colonial style of architecture in his congregations, but then we'll see kind of how those trends have changed. So these are just some clips of some of the churches that I found that Charles Faulkner also designed. Starting in 1924, you can see he kept with that classical style. This one's in Ohio. Kind of looks a lot like the original First Church of Christ Scientist Austin building that was on Colorado Street, columns. Very common to have tall staples, traditional building materials, and you can see this is up until 1946. Here are some more. Before he started to get into modernism, 1946 was when his book was published, so that's why I kind of chose that date as the benchmark. So you can see these are Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana. He was building churches all over the U.S. And then, starting in the late 1940s, his churches started to take a bit of a modern turn. These are drawings of some of the other churches that he's designed. In his book, he didn't specify that there was a specific correct style of architecture for Christian Science churches. So you can see that his style kind of changed in the 40s. He still had the reminiscent of like classical roof lines, and there's still a steeple, but now it's become more rectangular. And then later in 1949, this church is in California, you can see that he's gone to that flat roof style with a central tower, kind of forming, and then floor-to-ceiling windows. And here again, very similar style windows that are to the ones that are on this building with a central tower. And then in 1951, there was a church that he designed in Tokyo, Japan, which is, I don't believe is there anymore, but it has a striking resemblance to this church, and with the central tower, with the windows going all the way up. And in 1952, this church is in New York City. It's surrounded by other high-rise buildings now, but still looks very much the same. And you can see, when I was looking at the pictures of it, the doors have that geometrical wood carving pattern, very similar windows. He was nominated for a fellowship in his chapter of the American Institute of Architects in Chicago 3 times, but he never attained it. But the reason for his nomination was cited for his hollow steeple that he created. And the nomination cites that due to this feature, one could stand at the main floor and look up the hollow steeple out the ceiling, out of the highest window of the tower, and that at night the hollow steeples would be illuminated, and you would be able to see the lights through the windows in the tower. So you can see that the tower is exemplified in his buildings and in this building as well. Here are some other ones in New York and Illinois. Some very similar windows. This was from Google Street View, and if you zoom in, you can see that the windows are almost identical to the windows that are on this building. And then this church, Sixth Church of Christ Scientists in Point Loma, California, I don't have confirmation that he built this one, but when I zoomed in and could see inside through the window on Google Earth, and even just looking at the building, the way that it's been designed, I'm fairly confident that he also designed this building as well. He was active until the 60s when he passed away, and at that time he was licensed as an architect in 32 states, which is a pretty big deal for an architect. So some of his defining features that you can see in this building would be the geometrically carved wooden reader's podium, and then the wooden doors as well. He used this radial kind of circular style theater seating in the auditoriums. And a specific, important part of that is that he upholstered the seats on both sides for acoustical reasons, so that when sound would bounce back off the cinder block, it would be absorbed. And in some of the building notes, the building committee was like, why do we need to have upholstery on both sides? Can we just leave that out? And he was very adamant that it was important for the acoustics. He also claimed that he used the same acoustical plaster for the ceilings in all of his projects. And these very ornate, interesting, polished brass light fixtures that are found throughout this building, even in the bathrooms. They're custom made from a company in Chicago. And you'll see later that they're in a lot of his other modern works. And they're really interesting, original pieces. In his book, he describes Christian Science churches should have a homey, kind of feminine feel to them. So you'll see a lot of carpeting and wood and lighter colors and a warmer feel. So these are other modern interiors that I've found of his buildings that he built in the 50s to 60s. These ones are in New York, but as you can see, the tower has this long hanging polished brass light fixture, and then they're found again in the auditorium along the walls. There's similar geometrically carved wooden doors. The theater style seating is similar. Even the reader's podium looks very familiar to this building. The placement of the windows on both sides of the auditorium to let in light. And then this one's a drawing of one of his churches in California, again with the reader's podium having geometrical shapes. This is a picture of a boardroom from one of his churches in New York. And then on the bottom, these are pictures of this building under construction. So this is a picture of the boardroom pre-wood paneling and how it looked quite similar to the one that was in New York in the way that it was oriented and with the marble surround of the fireplace. It's there's a lot of similarities. However, this is the only building of his that I've found that has exposed concrete block walls, and that are in such a kind of intentional pattern that it seems that they were intended to be left exposed. This is a picture of the marble slabs going up on the tower. I found in my research an interesting news article from 1969 that the congregation was doing some rehabilitation on the tower. So they had taken all the slabs off and they were putting them back on. But when they had taken them off, they had them set aside so that they could do the work and then put them back. They were actually stolen. And so there was an article put in the newspaper saying, can anyone find these? They were unique because they came from a quarry in Virginia that had gone out of business. So they were irreplaceable, really. And then there's a later article that the church had found them. Miraculously, they appeared, I think, 4 weeks later or something. They found them nearby, a couple blocks over. So they were able to put back the original Virginia greenstone marble. The other aspect of its significance lies in that it has these specific characteristics of the architectural principles and the functional design of Christian Science architecture, and it's a very intact example of the transition from classical to modern architectural design and construction methods in that mid-20th century. So just an overall evolution of Christian Science architecture. These buildings aren't necessarily designed by Faulkner, but by other people, just to get an idea of what they were looking like at the time. So the early 1900s, like I mentioned, were classical, more traditional style. And then in the 20s to 40s, we're seeing a little bit more modern, simplified, kind of stripped down versions of those previous iterations. And then post-1946, after his book, you're seeing these more concrete structures, brutalist and modern-looking buildings. So although their exteriors were starting to vary widely over time, the interior design of the Christian Science Church has stayed essentially the same. This is just one of the floor plans that Charles Faulkner kind of used as an example in his book, and he had examples that he thought would be the best for a one-story square building on a small lot and a corner lot, and how that building should look. So this was his ideal L-shaped one-story corner lot plan. And you can see there's the auditorium separate on a separate wing than the Sunday school, and this kind of narrow corridor behind the reader's podium that has private spaces for the readers, and the musicians often will have their own attached bathrooms with ample windows to let light into their rooms. This kind of offers a sense of privacy for them. And then this on the right is a floor plan of this building. So if you kind of shift it, you can see that it essentially follows these principles with an open foyer that feels kind of homey, and then leads you into the auditorium on one wing, and with the private quarters in the back. And then on the separate wing are the administrative and the Sunday school uses, and they have their own separate entrance, which was important. Interestingly, though, about this building is that there's an interior courtyard, and you can see it from the auditorium. I haven't found any of his other designs to have interior courtyards, and I don't know whether that was to accommodate letting the light come in through the auditorium, or had to do with the climate here. I'm not sure, but it's the only one I've seen that has an interior courtyard, which is really interesting. So in its significance related to modern construction methods, the building was entirely built of concrete blocks and with a steel truss roof system, and it had air conditioning throughout since it was built. And that was common of construction ongoing in the 50s. However, what wasn't common was that these concrete blocks were left exposed, and that they were patterned in this kind of basket weave pattern, and intentionally left exposed to the interior. There's, if you look around, you'll see that there's one pattern for the rest of the space, and then a specific, more intricate pattern that's used in the actual auditorium space. So concrete blocks were being used in the construction industry. They were beneficial because they were a long-lasting building material. They had a high fire resistance, and they were resistant to tests. They also allowed a lot of flexibility in design because they came in different sizes and shapes and textures, so it allowed kind of variations in design. They also had a good sound absorption and insulation values, so it allowed them to be left exposed. You could either paint them or cover them, but they were chosen to be left exposed in this case. So yeah, that's one of the most interesting things I found about this building is that it has the exposed concrete block, unlike some of the other ones. I think it's a fascinating feature. It was probably the most striking feature that I noticed when I came in. But it definitely has different mixed reviews. I was reading from the building committee when they were sending Charles Faulkner kind of a thank you note after the church had opened, letting him know how the services went, what people thought of the building. They said that people really liked it, but there were some mixed reviews about the exposed concrete block, and I can just imagine people thinking, like, is it done? Are they finished? Are they gonna put stuff on that? But in the letter it said, well, that could be expected of such an innovative design and new design idea. So that really led me to think that there was a reason why he left them exposed, and that it has a key part in the significance of this building. So you guys have a lot of reasons to be proud about this building's history and your congregation's history, and I'm very thankful that you guys have been open to sharing it with me, and that I could share these findings with you.